All right. Welcome again. Let's get started. My name is Simone Turek Lee. I'm with John Burton Advocates for Youth, and we're here to talk about foster youth and tax filing, helping youth prepare, file, and follow through. We're going to go through a bunch of information about updated resources available for helping young people connect with local support to get their taxes filed, and then how you can help them really prepare for that and what happens after you file taxes. So without further ado, we're going to jump in. So first we'll do some introductions. We'll do a quick icebreaker. We'll talk a little bit about why are we talking about tax filing? Why is John Burton Advocates for Youth always talking about tax filing? We'll provide an overview of the California Foster Youth Tax Credit and some other common credits. We'll talk a little very briefly about implementation progress. Some of you may have joined us back in September for an entire webinar on that. We'll have like one slide on that. And then we'll talk kind of the meat of the webinar. We'll talk about how county child welfare agencies and community partners across the board can support young people that have been in foster care with filing their taxes, with preparing for filing, with filing, and then after they file. My colleague Carla, who I'll introduce in just a minute, will talk a little bit about what happens after youth file and how you can support them, and also just preparing year-round for the next year, some of the things that they should be doing throughout the year. Then we'll jump into a question and answer session. So please, as questions come up, please do submit questions through the questions function. I know we also have a chat box. The chat box does go to I believe hosts and panelists only. So feel free to put chats in there, but I think it's easier for us to sift through the questions box. So if you're able, please throw your questions in there. Carla will be answering some questions throughout the webinar if they're sort of simple, easy to answer via chat. But we also will want to save questions that we want everyone to hear, because maybe they're coming up frequently in the question and answer session. So please enter those throughout. All right. So my name is Simone Turek Lee. I'm the Director of Housing and Health, or excuse me, that title is outdated, Housing and Economic Mobility at John Burton Advocates for Youth. And I'm joined by Carla Macias, and I will pass to her to introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Carla Macias, and I am a consultant with JBay on this foster youth tax project. I've been working with JBay on it since September 2022. Previously, I was with Santa Clara County Social Services for 23 years, and the last 15 of that time was in the Transitioned Age Youth Bureau. And Santa Clara County, the youth center, the hub, was the first foster youth specific VITA site. So I am also a VITA volunteer now since 2021. Thanks and welcome, everyone.
Thanks, Carla. All right, I just want to do a quick check-in. A couple people are saying they have no video. I can't tell if they're saying that they are intentionally having no video or they can't get video. I just want to make sure, can folks see the PowerPoint? Okay, great. Thank you for all the thumbs up. Even after years of doing webinars, I'm always worried something's going wrong on the tech end. Okay. If you do have any technical issues, do feel free to, chat us and we'll try to get you help. For those who are asking about the PowerPoint, we do record the webinar and we, make the slide deck available. So later today, I'll be sending out the slide deck and the recording to everyone who registered. So yes, you will receive that. We'll also send you, there's a number of links that are in the slide deck that we'll just send you in the body of the email as well to make it easy. All right. So we're going to first just do sort of a quick icebreaker here. But tax filing is something that is not obviously unique to young people in foster care. It's something that saying goes, the only things in life guaranteed are death and taxes, I think, which I think is a terrible saying. But it is a saying, and there's a reason for that, right? at some point, almost everybody has to file taxes. Maybe not right now, but at some point in life, it has to happen, right? And so it's an important independent living skill to learn, but it can be intimidating. And I want to know what the first thing that comes to mind for everyone here is when you think about filing your taxes. And if you can throw that in the chat, thank you. And I'll kind of share out some of those answers. So we've got someone that just said gulp, yuck, pain, stress, stressful, dread, expensive, ugh, a lot of money, scary, overwhelming, paperwork, I can't do it, confusing, scared I'll do them wrong and go to jail. Oh my goodness. Get it done ASAP, overwhelming. How much will I have to pay? Yes, I hear you. Time consuming, draining, confusion, IRS, tedious, headache, scary. Audit. Oh Lord. I'll stop there. You can see most people do not have positive associations, with tax filing. And so you can imagine, and if there's any young people on the webinar, when you're young and you have never filed taxes before, that is like times 10, right? And you have a lot of concern about what this means, even though it might be something that helps you, right? It's scary, it's daunting, it's intimidating. So that's one of the reasons that we're really trying to make tax filing something we talk about while young people are still connected to the system, whether in care or still receiving services. Oh, someone said a positive thing, vacation on my refund. There we go. We got a positive one. So we want to make sure that this is something that's talked about as we talk about independent living skills. And we talk a lot about financial literacy, and this is part of financial literacy, right? So let's really quickly just let's take our temperature here. We want to know where everyone who's on the webinar is in terms of feeling prepared to help young people, not necessarily to file their taxes for them. That's not what we're here to talk about. We don't expect you to do that. But how does everyone feel in terms of assisting young people with getting the information they need to file and supporting young people with getting those taxes filed? 0 is I don't feel prepared yet. 10 is I have the information I need. I appreciate that people are putting it in the chat. I'm actually going to launch a poll, and we're going to answer that way so we can sort of see some data. So go ahead and enter your number. And just so you know, we're going to take this little poll again at the very end of the webinar. Hopefully we'll move the needle for folks. If you're at a 0, maybe you'll go to a 5. If you're at a 5, maybe you'll go to a 10, or maybe you'll go to a 7. That's okay too. All right, so I'll give about 5 more seconds to answer, and then we'll end the poll.
There's a question, or there is a comment in the chat that the poll only goes to 8. If you scroll down, there's that little gray sidebar, and you scroll down, and it goes up to 10.
Thank you, Carla. All right, so I'm going to end the poll right now. Okay. It's all over the place, and that's fantastic. So we've got people who are just starting out with this information. Then we've got people who are at 10, 9 and 8, 9 and 10. So they're pretty, they're pretty good here on the information, and maybe they can even chime in during the Q&A session and give some tips. So thanks everyone. We'll check in about this at the end as well. All right. So why should current and former foster youth file taxes? And I also want to say 100% of young people shouldn't necessarily file. There are young people it doesn't make sense for them to file, but there's a lot of misconceptions, and I think there's a lot of beliefs that most young people shouldn't be filing their taxes, and that's certainly not the case. So we want to dispel that myth. We want to talk about why young people should be filing their taxes. So even if they're not required to, because we know when you're under a certain income, you're not required to file your taxes, but even if you're not required, there are reasons to potentially file. So the first one is money, right? Someone said vacation on my return. So you might get a tax return. And if you're a young person who's been in foster care, and with the exception of about 7% of young people, you're going to get a return. And so that's a huge reason to file. You look on the blue box there, you can see this past tax season, young people who filed with a VITA site, and we'll learn what a VITA site is later in the presentation, but it's essentially a tax preparation site. Of the young people who filed with those sites, which were hundreds of young people, this last tax season, that are associated with the tax project, the average return in total that young people who filed as single filers got back was $1,370. The average return that young people got who were parenting, so head of household filers, was $5,265 cash back. That is significant, right? And I think I got my figure wrong. Just 4% owed taxes. So 96% of young people actually got a return. I think I said 7%, but it was 4%. It's even less. So most young people are getting a return when they're filing, that are sort of the demographic that we're talking about today. Okay, other reasons to file. So on the right, tax filing is how you access state and federal relief. Now, this is something we learned, learned the hard way during the pandemic. We all know, we were all here, for the pandemic, and there was those pandemic stimulus payments. 60% of young people that filed through the VITA sites with the project, with the tax project, had not received their stimulus payments simply because they had not filed taxes, right? So we learned very quickly, we've got to get young people these stimulus payments, and filing their taxes is the way to get them. So in the future, if there's state and federal relief, I mean, we think about the wildfires happening in LA right now and other things that might happen. The world seems to be having a lot, our world seems to be, there's a lot going on right now, and we don't know what to expect. And if we do have an instance where there's state and federal relief, we want young people to receive that. So there's another reason. Another more kind of common occurrence or common reason is it establishes income for public benefits. So you do have to, in most cases, have proof of income when you apply for public benefits. Taxes are the easiest way to provide that proof of income. And the beautiful thing is that those the tax refunds that people receive are not counted against eligibility for public benefits. So that is huge. I know a lot of people, there's a lot of confusion about guaranteed income and like, how does that interact with public benefits if there's no waiver, and you don't have to worry about that with the return that young people receive from their taxes. I mentioned this earlier, but this is an important independent living skill that we all have to do it eventually. And it's something that there's just not a lot of guidance. We're not learning it in school. Unless you're taking accounting, I don't think we're taking classes on filing taxes. And if you don't have parents that have filed taxes and that can guide you, or a trusted adult, who's doing that, right? You're probably going to go to a paid preparer, and you don't have to do that. So that's a really important thing for us to talk about is where this kind of lives in the world of ILP, right? And lastly, it uncovers identity theft and tax fraud. So unfortunately, as all of you probably know, young people are more likely that are in foster care or that have been in foster care are more likely to experience identity theft and tax fraud, and be victims of tax fraud. And this is all sort of uncovered when you file your taxes. And so it's a way of figuring this out sooner than later, while you're, again, still connected to a system where you can get help with resolving those issues. All right. So a quick overview of common tax credits for current and former foster youth. We're really going to focus today on the foster youth tax credit, but we will mention some other credits. And I'll also just pause for a second. I know there are tons of technical questions about filing taxes. Feel free to put those in the chat. Carla's a VITA volunteer. She can respond to those, but we are going to try today to focus heavily on higher level guidance for how you can assist young people. But so if your technical question doesn't get answered because the volume is too high and Carly can't get to them all, feel free to follow up at a later date, and we'll get that question answered. All right. So the foster youth tax credit is a state tax credit, California, and it is the first in the nation, the first ever tax credit for current and former foster youth. There's been other types of foster care related tax credits for caregivers and but not for young people. And so yay, California, for doing something innovative. And this was in 2021. This first came up, we first proposed this idea to the Newsom administration, and we had a lot of support from State Controller Betty Yee, the state legislature, particularly Senator Caballero, and Governor Newsom thought this was a good idea. He put it in his January budget in 2022. And so in 2023 that was the first tax season that young people could file and receive this credit. Super exciting. It's administered, again, it's a state tax credit. So it's administered not by the IRS, but by the California Franchise Tax Board, the FTB, in partnership with the California Department of Social Services, which is the entity that verifies foster care eligibility. So they work in partnership to do that verification. And so far, so good. And in 2025, so kind of what is the foster youth tax credit, right? In 2025, the foster youth tax credit will provide up to $1,154 for youth who, and you can see all of the eligibility parameters here. You have to file your state tax return for, for this year, it would be for 2024. You have to be between 18 and 25 on the last day of the tax year. So for filing 2024 taxes, December 31st, 2024. And I want to be clear, 18 to 25 is inclusive of 25. So you just can't have turned 26 before this past December 31st. You have to have been, here's the foster care participation threshold. You all knew this one was coming, right? You have to have been in foster care on or after your 13th birthday. So it's not like extended foster care. You didn't have to be in care all the way to age 18. Fortunately, it's a broader eligibility definition, but you do have to have been in care on or after age 13. If you're familiar with some of the kind of post-secondary age thresholds, this is the same age threshold as Next Up, which is the community college campus support program for foster youth. And it's also kind of the same threshold for when you become an independent student on financial aid on the FAFSA. So there's some, crossover here in terms of eligibility thresholds. You have to have earned some money. This is a program of the California Earned Income Tax Credit. So you have to have earned at least $1. That is just $1. You have to have worked for just $1 at least during the tax year. So during 2024. And the maximum money you can make is $31,950. Now, when we say earned money, it doesn't have to be a place where you get a W-4. It can be gig work. It can also even, Carla, am I right? It can be cash paid, although it's a little harder to prove.
Yes, it is a little bit harder to prove with the cash. What I have suggested to young people is get a letter from the person who they're working for with how much they're earning. And then also for the young person to sort of set up a more like legitimate way of, instead of like maybe cash, use a cash app just for their business. So even though they, it's not, they're not going to get a W-2, but just have it more formalized with the cash app so they can track their income better that way, but then also get a letter from that person as well.
Thank you. All right. I also just want to address two questions in the chat because it's super relevant to what I'm talking to right now. I'm going to finish the bullets. We have two more, and then I'm going to answer those questions. You have to have lived in California for at least half of 2024, so half of the tax year, and you have to have a social security number or an ITIN, an individual tax identification number. So the real kind of critical things here that are, to look at are the age parameters, obviously, the when you were in foster care, and the earnings. I want to just answer, someone said, my youth is 20 and gets paid from California, but lives in Washington. Are these numbers and information applicable to them? The question is, did they live in Washington in 2024? If they lived in California at least half of the year in 2024, then they'd be eligible. As long as they are from, were in foster care in California. So that's the answer to that question. And then someone else asked about previous tax years. So this is a big one, and I want to underscore this. The foster youth tax credit became available in 2023, so they could file their 2022 taxes. So you can go back as far as 2022 because that is the first year it became available. So if this is the first year the young person will be filing taxes, and they had taxes they could file for 2022 and 2023, they could file and get 3 years worth of the credit, but they would have had to be eligible those years, right? So they can't like just be turning 18 because they wouldn't have been eligible the previous years. But if they're old enough to where they would have been eligible to file their 2022 taxes and receive it, they can back file and they can get that funding. I'll also just share that this tax credit, the amount slightly increases each year. So like last year, it was 1,117. So when they file for back years, it won't be 3 times 1,154. It'll be similar numbers, slightly lower. And the last thing there is that the up to, what that means is that if you earn, basically if you earn $25,000 a year, or excuse me, in 2024, if you earn $25,000 or more, the tax credit starts to lessen a little bit, right? So it's based on income, but up to $25,000, you're getting the full amount. Did I get that right, Carla?
Yes, so you will get the full amount if you, yes, if you, have your,
25.
you have your income and you lived in California for the whole year, you definitely get the whole amount of the foster youth tax credit.
Great. All right. I always check with Carla because she's our writing expert. Okay. So year 2 of foster youth tax credit implementation. So where are we? We did a whole webinar on this. So if you're interested in this type of information, I'll share a report you can look at or a webinar you can look at. But I just wanted to do a quick snapshot here to give people an idea of what we're looking at. This is the 3rd year of eligibility. So we didn't expect by year 3 to be, having a huge percent of the eligible population receiving this yet. So I want to brace you for that. And we have a long way to go, but it's not too shabby for year 3 for a very niche population that tends to not file taxes, right? So this year, last tax season, we're in 2025 now. 5,693 youth filed their state taxes and received the foster youth tax credit. This is a 16% increase from the year previous, 2023, and it is coincidentally also 16% of the estimated eligible population, right? So when we look at the full age range, everyone who's eligible in California, and that include, based on also average young people who are on average earning income, right? Because we have to factor that in as well. It's 16% of that population. So again, we didn't expect it to be at 100%. We didn't even expect it to be at 50%, because when you look at tax credit uptake, it's never at 100%, especially for state tax credits. But we know that we can do much, much better than 16% with all of your help. And this is as of the end of the tax season. When you look at
Simone, really quick, there's a lot of great questions in the chat and in the Q&A. A lot of them I'm going to save for later because I think they're really important questions for everyone to hear.
Fantastic. All right, so if you look on the right at the money numbers, so what are we talking about here? When about almost 5,700 young people filed, they collectively received 6.1 million from the foster youth tax credit alone, right? But we know they're not just receiving the foster youth tax credit, they're receiving other credits too. So their total return, I mentioned what the average amounts are, you can see them on the screen again. What that amounts to is more than $9 million. So we're looking at a significant amount of money that young people are owed. We don't want them to leave this money on the table. And then in the meantime, people need a new tire for their car. They need bus money. They need groceries. They need a place to live. Like all of these basic things in life that sometimes young people are struggling with, we don't want them to be leaving money on the table. So before we go and we look for money elsewhere, let's get what's ours, right? Or what's theirs. And then after that, we'll look to other options, but we want to make sure we're getting what's there. This is their money. All right. So in addition to the foster youth tax credit, current and former foster youth may qualify for other credits. They likely will qualify for some other credits. On the left, you can see the state tax credits. Now, I mentioned the California Earned Income Tax Credit, the Cali ITC. That's for low-income workers, basically, and young people may qualify for that, right? The Young Child Tax Credit, so this is for people who are custodial parents, right? And the same with the Child Independent Care Expenses Credit. And then there's a renter's credit. So these are common state credits young people qualify for. And then on the right-hand side, very similarly on the federal side, the federal tax credits, there's an earned income tax credit for on the federal side as well. also a child tax credit, also basically a child care tax credit, right? And then there are 2 credits associated with people who are in pursuing post-secondary education, and that's the American Opportunity Credit and Lifetime Learning Credit. Just to clarify, the credits with asterisks are what are called non-refundable tax credits. So they will reduce what you owe if you owe money, but they won't give you like cash back, right? The refundable tax credits, which the foster youth tax credit is refundable, means if you owe, it'll reduce what you owe, and then whatever's left over, you get that money, right? And if you didn't know anything, you get that all that money. So the refundable tax credits we like more, but we like the non-refundable ones too. And I'm not going to go into detail about what these credits are. You can always look them up online. It's very easy to do. Google them and they'll tell you how much they are and more information. All right, so what were we looking at last year on a county basis? So I mentioned an average 16% rate of receipt, right? So like if you look at Alameda County, they're right on par with that statewide average, right? But you can look at other counties in here and see some are below, some are well above, right? Like go Sutter. You know, I will say, just to be fair, there is a huge difference between being a large county and a small county. The large counties are more challenged in getting their percentages up. So we're not knocking anybody, right? We all got to be in this together and working to increase. We should be competing with ourselves, right? Work to increase from last year. That's the real goal, is moving up from where you were last year. I will say that for the 24 counties you don't see on here, the reason you don't see them is because they had less than 11 youth claim the credit. And so the data was masked that the FTB put out. And so we couldn't calculate a percentage. So that's why they're not mentioned. So some of the very small counties you will not see on here. And we did have a chat. We've been having a foster youth tax credit challenge that a lot of you have been participating in, where we do have counties compete in small, medium, and large categories. We will do that again this year. We did not do an opt-in this year. We figured, why are we making extra work for people? You don't have to opt into the challenge. We will calculate everyone's percentage at the end of the tax season, and we'll let you know which counties in their size category, you know, got the best percentage. It's just a fun competition, friendly competition. All right. And if you want to learn more about foster youth tax credit implementation, please look at this webinar and this report. It'll give you a bunch of information. And we'll be, like I said, we'll be sending out these this slide deck and all of the links in an email following the webinar later this afternoon. All right. So here's where this is about all of you, how county child welfare agencies and community partners can support foster youth to file their taxes, and current and former foster youth. So in the orange, it's sort of everything before taxes. In the turquoise, it's filing. And one thing that I know all of you can understand the importance of is outreach. Outreach is, you know, it's just like you can build it, but they're not going to come, right? Outreach is so key. If we don't get the word out about this, young people are not going to get this credit. And you all are the best poised to get the word out about this credit. At John Burton Advocates for Youth, we can email people and text people and put social media and listserv blasts, and we can do all that. But at the end of the day, we're not working with young people. We're not, they don't know us. Or they might know us as an organization, but we don't have a lot of those personal relationships. If you're a social worker, if you're a CASA, if you're a housing provider, case manager, coach, education specialist, attorney, advocate, caregiver, you know, any of those roles, you know that the relationship is what makes the difference. And so you are that trusted messenger to do that outreach and get that information to young people. So outreach is huge. That goes hand in hand with education, right? Young people need information on how to file and why they should. What are taxes? What does that mean when you file your taxes? So similarly, you all are wonderfully poised to do that education. And we have a bunch of resources to try to make it as easy as possible for you. And then young people need to prepare to file. So if you all remember, you know, the thing that I hate about taxes is that you do it just enough, you know, it's just infrequent enough, that kind of annual basis. It's just infrequent enough to where you sort of forget throughout the year what you're supposed to be doing, and then it comes up in your face and you're like, what I just did this last year, but I've got to now remember what bank do I have to log into to get this, and what you know, there's all these different things you have to get. So we've made a cheat sheet, right? So we have a tax prep checklist and other things to help young people help young people, you know, gather the documents they need to file, right? All the way from like ID to, you know, they got financial aid and they need to get information from their post-secondary institution, right? So how do you help young people prepare? The other piece is, where are they going to go file? So we'll talk about how to connect them to resources in the community, free resources, and also how to have guidance to self-file if that's what they would like to do. All of our resources are available at this link on the screen in one place on one page. But like I said, we'll send you a link to each and every one of them following the presentation. All right, so let's talk about outreach first. So the Franchise Tax Board makes posters available. They also have flyers. They make posters available for order. You can order posters in, gosh, I think it's in groups of 20. I might be wrong about that one, but you can order bulk orders of the poster and they'll mail them to you. This poster is from last year. They don't have the image available yet this year. So you can see that the credit amount is from last year, but it'll look the same. It'll just have the updated credit amount, and you can use that link on the screen to order posters from them. Put them up in your office, put them up in, if there's like you have ILP, like a hub or a space where young people come, you know, put them up. Let's spread awareness. That's a really low barrier thing you can do. The flyer in the middle is one that we make every year, and it's really it has the eligibility, and it really had the thing about our flyer, and why I suggest ordering or not ordering, but just using our flyer, is that it has a QR code and a link that will take young people to a youth-facing page that has all the information they need. Versus like the FTB one, I think it's great for a poster, but if you use the flyer, it's going to take you to sort of a general place for assistance, whereas this will be very targeted to young people from foster care. So that's available at the link. We have it in English, we have it in Spanish. You can print it, you can use it electronically. We also can customize this flyer, and I'll talk about that in a moment. We have a social media toolkit on the right-hand side. So if you are in the habit of, you know, Instagram, Facebook, please do pick that up and send those messages out. All right, so customizing the flyer. So if you work for a county child welfare agency, you have the mailing address of all the non-minor dependents in your county, right? And you know, it seems old school, like a mailer. You're like, you want us to send a mailer? Surprisingly, sometimes old school works, right? Word of mouth is super old school, and that's the best thing, right? Best thing going, the best form of outreach, right? We found this to be an effective strategy, is mailing these flyers to young people. So 5 counties implemented this in 2024. They did experience larger increases between 2023 and 2024 in terms of the number of young people claiming the tax filing and receiving the tax credit than other similar sized counties. So we did a comparison. This is again a low barrier thing you can do. We will customize the flyer as you see fit. For example, in LA, they wanted us to put their local volunteer tax income tax assistance site that serves foster youth. They wanted us to put the phone number on the flyer. So we did that, and you know, it was customized for them. We also will put a special QR code on each county's flyer so that we can tell you like how many scans it got, so it's trackable. So if you want to do that, please email JBASE project associate Cody Van Velden at the email on the screen. We will send you a customized version, however you'd like, and then you just have to print it out and do the mailing, obviously. So please, please, please consider this. We'd love to work with you. I think that's it for this slide. Let me move on. All right. So moving on to education, moving on from outreach to education now. We have a newly updated curriculum, workshop curriculum or training curriculum for young people. We made the PowerPoint for this a while back. We've expanded it. It's now it consists of 2 different sessions, and there's a trainer's guide. This is something you could pick up, an independent living program, ILP program could pick up and implement as 2 of their workshops. College campus support program can do it. Housing providers, like if you're a THP Plus or THP NMD provider, this is great for workshops for young people. CASA, so just any service provider, please, use this. You do not have to be a tax expert to deliver the curriculum. As long as you take some time to prepare, look over the trainer's guide, the information is all there. It's been vetted by young people who were in foster care. It's our youth advocate team at JBay did vet this and provide a bunch of feedback on it. And then it includes engagement activities, right? So it's not just you talking to people, but it's discussion, it's quizzes, polls, and we encourage you to do little prizes and, obviously do all of the other things you would do at workshops to engage young people, food. So yeah, and then what's covered are what are taxes, why should I file and when, what are tax credits, how do I prepare to file my taxes, how do I file my taxes, and then what happens after I file my taxes. So a lot of similar information we're talking about today, but sort of a different angle, right? Now, this training, just to kind of talk a little bit more about the how, it's delivered across 2 sessions, each about an hour and a half long. And you could change the timing a little bit if you add or remove engagement activities, obviously. We encourage you to keep the engagement activities. It could also be done as part of a 3-part series where the final session is a tax filing session. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, what that could look like. It can be done virtually or in person. If you're in person, you need, PowerPoint capability, obviously, Wi-Fi, there is, like an online video included. And then we recommend food and prizes. And 1 big training room is sufficient. We would have little breakouts, but, it wouldn't, I think 1 room would be fine. If you're doing it virtually, you do have to put some time in to set up the polls and quizzes sort of ahead of time in like Zoom or Mentimeter or something like that, unless you just want to utilize the chat or unmute people depending on your group size. And then you should have some breakout rooms so that young people can, they can't discuss in small groups on Zoom. We recommend at least 2 staff members to deliver this training. I think it's hard when it's just 1 person, because if anything comes up that's not training, like logistical, then you have to interrupt the training. And also it's nice to have sort of trade-off and delivering the content. So we'd say at least two staff members. And if you're doing it virtually, obviously having more support for tech troubleshooting and, participation in the breakout rooms is recommended. For preparation, really just reviewing the trainer's guide and the slide deck ahead of time. And then there are some items one in particular, that tax prep checklist that I mentioned is a good idea to print and provide to everyone who's there. And someone just said, how do we purchase the curriculum? This is free. So you can go to the link on the screen. I will say the PowerPoint is there now. The trainer's guide will be posted by next week. So grab it next week. You'll have the trainer's guide and the PowerPoint, and feel free to, if you have questions, let us know. And also we've tested this, but we want to hear from you. How did it go? Are there areas you think should be shortened, lengthened, more detail, less detail? We're open to feedback. So please, if you deliver this training, and we want to know if people are using it. So if you deliver it, we just drop us a line. Let us know that you did this training. We'd love to know how it went. Okay. So similarly, that training sort of has this tax prep checklist embedded in it, where you stop during the training and you sort of go through these items in small groups and figure out what you're missing. But this is an activity you can sit down one-on-one and do with a young person. So you don't have to deliver that training curriculum to help young people to prepare for filing their taxes, right? They just need to gather their documents. So if you want to sit down with the young person, or if you want to hand them this tax prep checklist, this is something that they'll go through. All of the items you see on the screen are talked about in detail in this tax prep checklist. So if, I don't know if you, how small this font is, but you can see, for example, the second box there says, do you have a social security number or an individual taxpayer identification number? If yes, bring those with you. If no, here's how you get your social security card. Here's how you get an ITIN. So it's more than just a list, right? It's great if you have them, bring them. If you don't, here's what to do. All right. So let's talk about filing taxes now. How are we recommending that you file? So as you all probably know, people can self-file. People can go, if you make under a certain income, you can go to what's called a volunteer income tax assistance site, a VITA site, and that's a tax preparer, right? And then you can also go to a paid preparer. I'm sure there's people on the webinar today that have a tax person they go to every year that they trust, and that's great. Here's the data. Here's what the data says. Paid preparers make way more mistakes than the volunteer income tax assistance site tax preparers. You might have a great one, that's good, but on average, they make a lot of mistakes. They also cost money. They're paid preparers. And for a young person where money is like, income is not plentiful, paying someone to do your taxes is not something you want to do. And if they have to say the paid preparer misses the foster youth tax credit, because that's usually what happens because they don't know about the credit, they have to go back and amend their taxes. They're going to have to pay to amend their taxes. So we strongly recommend that young people do not go to paid preparers. They also sometimes, the bad ones will be predatory. They'll give you like some sort of high interest loan so you can get your refund sooner. By the time you've paid the loan off, you lost your whole refund. So we recommend doing one of these other things. Now, the VITA site, which is in the center one there, that is something that we're going to talk about more specifically later, but that's about 11% of young people that received the foster youth tax credit last year went to a VITA site. Now, VITA sites are not necessarily widely available. There are VITA deserts. There are often, it's not always easy to get an appointment. But so I think that if that wasn't the case, that would be higher. You receive one-on-one assistance at a VITA site. So there's a lot of support there. But the reality is they're not always accessible. So self-filing is an option, and it's the most common option that young people have used that receive the foster youth tax credit. And 81% of young people who receive their credit self-filed. Now, self-filing, you can do it for free, which is what we recommend. And we have a guide that will take you screenshot by screenshot how to self-file. So you could sit down with a young person and help them do that with that guide. You could give it to them and say, do this yourself if you feel like that's something that they're capable of. And the reality is most young people that are self-filing, this is a guess, we believe they're probably using like a TurboTax, right? Because we don't know in the data, the self-filing, who's using the free myfreetaxes.org and who's using, say, TurboTax's software. But we strongly encourage young people to self-file online for free. If they are using TurboTax's free version, fantastic, but just be aware that it won't be free if you have 1099s, which is what happens when you're self-employed, like you do gig work, like drive for Uber. So again, we strongly recommend filing for free. All right, so let's talk about VITA sites first. So volunteer income tax assistance sites are, they offer free one-on-one tax return preparation to people who earn $67,000 or less. And this is the IRS's strategy of providing free tax preparation to individuals who are low income. It is done by volunteers. So the IRS's strategy is sites recruit volunteers to complete people's taxes. I know it's like the first time you hear about it, sounds kind of wild that this is all done by volunteers, but that's what it is. And so we've got sites across the country, across California, that are helping sometimes niche populations. You might have a VITA site that's in Koreatown in a certain neighborhood, right? Affiliated maybe with a community center. You might have a VITA site that caters to seniors. in a certain part of the community and works hand in hand with a lot of senior centers. Well, when we started this project, we worked with a lot of fantastic community-based providers that said, we'll be a VITA site for foster youth. So we worked with a handful of organizations to get certified by the IRS, and they are now assisting young people specifically with filing their taxes. There are currently 5 volunteer income tax assistance sites for current and former foster youth across the state. They are located in the Bay Area and LA, so they are not everywhere. And obviously there's just 5 of them. They can't help every young person file their taxes. So it's important that we talk broader about VITA sites, but we want you to know that those sites are there. Even though there are not enough VITA sites to serve all eligible individuals, there are virtual sites. So if you're in a VITA desert, what's called a VITA desert, you can also try to work virtually with the site if you don't have one in your area, because some do offer remote assistance. So more about VITA. When tax season officially begins, you can use our VITA roster. We have a roster of VITA sites, and you can locate the following. So first, you can locate the VITA sites for foster youth. So again, there's 5 of them. These sites are best equipped to support young people that have foster care experience. Not only do they know all about the tax credit, but they know how to work with this population. They know how to work with first-time filers. They understand the age range. There's just more familiarity. However, we have trained a handful of general sites across the state, and we are going to continue to train them on claiming the foster youth tax credit and working with young people from foster care. So the reality is the tax credit is new. It's for a very small population, and people are not very aware of it. It's a state tax credit also, not very aware of it. So you need to know that going into your VITA appointment. Young people need to know that going into their VITA appointment if they're going into a VITA appointment at a general site. And that's why we recommend they bring a 1-pager on the tax credit so that they can say, please make sure I receive this credit. Or if it's on their phone, please make sure I receive this credit, right? But just know kind of that second bullet there, that there are a handful of sites that have received training from us. At least some of their volunteers have received training from us on claiming that credit. And those will be noted on the roster. Another feature of the roster is it'll note the sites that are open beyond April that we've been able to identify. They may or may not have been trained on the foster youth tax credit, but what we've done is we've gone through and looked through and identified who stays open past that April tax deadline. This is important because a lot of sites close down after that April tax deadline. That deadline is only real for people who owe taxes. If you don't owe taxes, which is 96% of young people in foster care, then you have till October to file. But good luck finding a place to help you after April, right? So we've identified the sites that will stay open, and the foster youth sites will stay open, by the way, but not everybody's gonna get an appointment there. So this roster will show that. It'll also provide the VITA locator. There's a VITA locator tool where you can look up any site in the state. So if you can't get served by one on our roster, you can use that tool to identify additional sites. And the roster is not live yet because it's not, tax season doesn't officially launch to the very end of January. So most sites are opening, either, like February 1st, right? And so the roster will become available at the very end of January, but it'll be at that link. All right. So let's talk about 2 sites, 2 of the foster youth sites, because they are opening up their doors broader than their immediate community. First, we have San Francisco court-appointed special advocates, SF CASA. So I'm sure people are familiar with CASAs. CASAs are fantastic. A lot of young people have CASAs, right? It's like a special adult in their life that is, the idea is they remain, in their life for a long time or forever, right? And they are appointed by the courts. It's an official established relationship. And one of the CASA sites, the one in San Francisco, was one of the fantastic organizations that said, we'll be a VITA site, right? And so they ran for a couple of years and served the San Francisco community and a little bit broader, East Bay, some San Mateo. And this year they have increased their capacity and have bravely said, we'll serve anyone. We will make it work. We have enough capacity. And so if you are, particularly if you are affiliated with CASA, because I know we have CASAs on this call, if you are a CASA in another county, SF CASA is saying call or don't call, email us, email us or go to this website. We will coordinate with you and assist the young people you serve. Also, if you're not affiliated with CASA, any young person who has been in foster care can reach out for an appointment with SF CASA and do their taxes virtually. So go to that link on the screen, and you can, or have the young person go to that link on the screen and they can get an appointment virtually or in person if they're local. A site down south in in LA, and our thoughts are with everyone in LA right now with the wildfires. We know that, you know, it's kind of been strange to just business as usual. We're hosting a webinar, and meanwhile, there's a huge crisis happening in our state. So the Community College Foundation, fantastic VITA site, has been serving young people also for a few years now. And they can assist youth virtually across most of Southern California. So you can see the counties there that they can serve. So they're located in LA. They can serve young people in LA, obviously, and they are. They can also serve young people in Kern, Riverside, San Bernardino, Santa Barbara, and Ventura County. They'll start accepting VITA appointments through that Calendly link on February 1st. However, in the meantime, I want to plug something. They're offering financial literacy workshops, and you can sign up through that same link. So have youth sign up if you want to provide them a financial literacy workshop that is being offered through the Community College Foundation. They're seasoned on this. They know what they're doing, and it's all virtual. So go to that Calendly link and you can see what they have going on there. All right. So we're going to shift gears here and talk about self-filing. So again, this is what most young people are doing, and we want to encourage them to do it with guidance and for free. So myfreetaxes.org actually uses the same same software program that the VITA sites use, which is called TaxSlayer, but it's a different version. It's a public-facing version. And you can also self-file for free using TurboTax, but as I mentioned, unless you get the free version, you will pay for it. And if you get the free version and you have what are called 1099 forms, which means you did gig work, you were self-employed, you're not going to be able to get through filing on the free version. So really, and if you have 1099s or you have financial aid, which requires, you know, just can be more complex tax filing situation, we actually do really recommend that you go to a VITA site, because it's, you know, it's harder to self-file when you have more going on there. But if you don't have 1099s or financial aid, self-filing is certainly, and self-filing is an option regardless, but we're trying to give some guidance here on, you know, kind of realistically what is what's appropriate. If you self-file, if you self-file, there are two resources. One is a step-by-step, just kind of still, you know, not a training, not an interactive training, but just a step-by-step guide, screenshot by screenshot of what to click, where to go, what you need. And it walks through myfreetaxes.org and literally points to the button you're supposed to press, right? There's also an interactive, like a person talking, like say interactive, but like a live, it's recorded, but you know, a training that iFoster put together for last tax season, and they did let us know they're going to update it for this tax season as well. So that will be available through iFoster. I'm not sure of the exact date they'll have it available, but probably around the same time that we do. What happens with tax season is you have to wait first to get the new tax amounts because they change, or excuse me, the new credit amounts because they change. And then you also, for some things, you have to wait until you're really close to tax season launching because certain things aren't open and available. So you have this sort of hurry up and wait situation where we want to get people the information ahead of time, but all the information isn't available. So that's where we are. So we're providing you links ahead of time, so that you have them. Just know that they won't necessarily be available for a couple weeks now. Okay. Let's talk about tax events, because tax events can be VITA associated and they can be self-filing associated, but they provide a sort of in-between option for young people who Maybe they don't want to sit down with the guide by themselves and self-file, and maybe they don't have an adult that can sit down with them and help them figure this all out. But they don't necessarily feel that they need a one-on-one appointment at a VITA site, or they can't get one. So let's talk about self-filing events first. So this is an event, and I bet there's people on the webinar today that have done these. A group of young people, like a workshop, right? Group of young people are in a room. There is the self-filing guide is on the screen, and they are each at a computer with space between them doing their taxes using the self-filing guide. There's a kind of like a facilitator at the front who's saying, screen 1, everybody do this, right? And if they get stuck or they're like, this is going too fast for me, I need more help, there are VITA volunteers that you invite to the event that will come and assist that young person, right? But it's more efficient than everyone sitting down one-on-one with someone, right? It's a bulk strategy where you can help more young people at once. Again, ideal for young people that might have some reservations about self-filing on their own, but maybe don't need the full attention of a VITA site. Another option that provides more support is called a VITA sub-site event. This is where VITA essentially brings their services to you, and they make one-on-one appointments with young people in your space. So I know a lot of places have done this and found a lot of success where they have a day where they've just, they bring the VITA site to you, you set up shop, and you're, it's place-based. It's a service where you're bringing it to young people. So it's a lot easier than helping young people make a bunch of individual appointments. So if you work in a program or you have an ILP or, any sort of group situation, these are ways to help young people sort of all at once. So how do you do this? How do you do this? This is really what you want to do in partnership with a VITA site. So if you're ILP, if you're a housing program, if you're anybody who has a group of young people, you first identify a VITA site in the community. You can use our roster to do that. If you have trouble, email us. We'll help connect you to someone. Request their partnership on either a sub-site event or a self-filing event. And you can also partner up with other providers, local campuses, so to make it a little bigger. Like if you're like, I think I only have 6 people, maybe double that, right? Maybe call a program, make it 12 people. Outreach, of course, is key, right? Email, text, call, flyers, have an RSVP form, do it all again, right? Because you don't want to have the VITA site, the VITA volunteers come and like 3 people show up. You want to make this as successful as possible. So you guys know how to do this. If you host workshops for young people, you know how to get, people in their seats. So all those strategies you normally use. Incentivizing attendance is a big one, right? Can you offer some sort of financial incentive on top of the tax filing, like a small gift card or raffle off a gift card, offer food? All right. So more how-to. One thing that's really important is making sure young people are prepared. So one idea is to prepare them by doing Taxes 101 curriculum, right? We talked earlier about the Taxes 101 training curriculum that we have. So you could do the full Monty, you could do session 1, session 2. Session 3 is your self-filing or your sub-site event. If you don't have the capacity to do all of that, that's totally fine. Just do the self-filing or the sub-site event, and before that event, meet one-on-one with each youth to review the tax prep checklist and help them gather their documents, or just have a session with them together using the tax prep checklist. Okay. I know there's a lot of information on this on this screen. This is coming to you in an email. But this is sort of the logistics of the how-to. So if you're going to pull off an event, here's all the information you need on like, well, how many staff do we need? Where should it be? Well, how long should it be? Et cetera, et cetera. I won't go over this in detail because you won't remember anything I said, but we'll send this to you. I'll just go over a few points here. One is just that, again, you do need to have VITA volunteers come to your campus or your program or your site, and you should talk with them about what they recommend for VITA staffing. We have some recommendations down here. Staffing, you need at least 2 staff members for up to 15 young people. More is always better. And you want to have some space for check-in. So you want to have, like for a sub-site event, you want to have, because there's kind of private appointments happening, having a second check-in area is good. That's kind of away from the actual VITA preparation area, where you have people come check in, you double check they have all their documents, you have a printer, and you print stuff that they forgot or they couldn't print. For self-filing, you can do it in the same room, and you can maybe spend the first 30 minutes doing check-in or the first 20 minutes doing check-in. You just need to make sure that for both situations, there's adequate space for there to be space in between people, and that everyone has their own device, their own like laptop, ideally. For a sub-site event, each VITA volunteer needs a laptop because they're shuffling young people in and out of appointments. But for self-filing, every young person needs a laptop so that they can be filing their taxes simultaneously. All right. So now I'm going to transition, pass it over to Carla, and Carla's going to talk a little bit about how you can help. First, sort of what happens after you file, and then we'll sort of come full circle back around to how do you help prepare them for next year? Like what do they do throughout the year to prepare? She'll also touch a little bit on identity theft and just some kind of other commonly asked questions. All right, Carla.
Yes, thanks, Simone. And I hope some of the questions that you've put in the chat or the Q&A will be answered right now. So what happens after youth file and how can you help? Next slide. So if a youth filed and missed the foster youth tax credit, so they can still receive that. So if the foster youth tried to self-file using an online platform and they want support through a VITA site for an amendment, they need to bring a copy of the current tax return along with all their tax forms. So if they filed their taxes last year, they missed it, they can go back and do an amendment and get that credit. It is fairly simple to do an amendment on myfreetaxes.org or TurboTax to go back and get that foster youth tax credit. If they're not familiar with the platform, they may need a little bit support and it may take a little bit longer. Therefore, having someone there to support them would be helpful. And you can also Google it. I'm trained on the TaxSlayer platform. I've never used TurboTax in my life. And so I Googled it and I've been able to help a few young people go back and claim it on TurboTax. Besides, if a young person missed the foster youth tax credit, there are other common situations why one should amend a tax return. You realize you missed out on claiming a tax deduction or credit, like the California renter's credit. You accidentally claimed the wrong filing tax status. You need to add or remove a dependent. You forgot to claim taxable income on your tax return, like you missed a W-2. And that was one of the questions in the chat. Our young people do move quite often. And so let's say they had an employer for like 3 months. They never updated their address with that employer. The employer sent their W-2 to their previous address and the young person never received it. They should call that employer and ask for that W-2. This is a very common thing amongst our young people is they're like, oh yeah, well, I worked for this one place for 2 weeks. I was like, you need to get that W-2. So that is one thing that I really emphasize. Even if they worked for just 1 day for an employer, they need to get that W-2 so they can call them. Also on the IRS website, there is a way they can get a transcript of that, that time with that employer, and that can also be used when they're getting their taxes done. Another reason why you should amend your return, you realized you claimed an expense, deduction, or credit that you weren't eligible to claim. And as we know, foster youth are vulnerable to identity theft because their personal identifiable information can be accessed by many adults they encounter during their time in care, including non-custodial family members, foster parents, and social services personnel. For an in-care youth, if they uncover that someone used their identity to file a tax return, they should contact their dependency attorney for assistance. And then for aged out foster youth, they should still contact their previous dependency attorney or even a social worker, probation officer, or CASA and ask them to, for a referral or help them find a legal service that can help them to remedy that situation. Next slide. So what does tax fraud look like? So here we have some examples of what can happen. Someone used your Social Security or ITIN to file, to file a return. You received a W-2 for an employer you never worked for. So there's many different, ways the tax fraud can look like. So how do you remedy this? If your Social Security number or individual tax identification number were stolen, there is a form on the IRS website. It's called the Identity Theft Affidavit, and you can submit that form online or by mail. And that information is on the link below. And even after you submit that and you're still having problems with it, the IRS does have a 1-800 number that they can call. And also, they have an Identity Theft Central link that has a lot of resources that can help with identity theft. And one thing that I really do recommend, if a young person had some identity theft while they were in care, and we know that, as counties, you're responsible to help a young person, if they had identity theft. There is an identity protection PIN. It is a 6-digit number that prevents someone else from filing a tax return using your Social Security number or your individual taxpayer identification number. The IP PIN is only known to you and the IRS. It helps the IRS to verify your identity when you file your electronic or paper tax return. And this is done through creating an ID.me account, which also allows one to check the status of their return. And all of that is on the IRS website. On the Franchise Tax Board side, if there's been tax fraud, there is a referral report that they can do online, and then you could also mail it. And they also have a 1-800 number as well. And the FTB also provides a link for one to check their a status on their return. So one thing that comes in common, and this was something in the chat, so if a foster youth files as single and their return was rejected due to someone claiming them when they should not have claimed them on their return, we recommend the young person to go ahead, send in a paper return, especially if you're e-filing and it got rejected. We always send in the paper return to the IRS and FTB. Both agencies will likely send a letter to the foster youth and the person who claimed them on their tax return requesting additional information, and they will be the ones to determine the outcome of the return. The foster youth will receive a letter, like I said, and they may need some help to decipher what is being asked. So one of the questions was, if a young person lives with a caregiver, they should have a conversation with that caregiver and say, okay, yes, caregiver, you could claim me because you provided for more than, as long as they lived with that person for 6 months or more, that person can claim them. But you can have that conversation because this is a credit for the young person. So have a conversation with that caregiver. Okay, yes, you can legally claim them on your tax return. But we want to maybe help this young person get this foster youth credit. Will you claim them on your tax return, or can they file as a single? So that's the conversation the young person can have with their caregiver. All right, next slide. So taxes are filed, now what? It is important to, like I noted, if the IRS or FTB needs to, just sort of like figure out what's going on with the tax return, they will send a letter to the young person. The young person, the other thing we want to remind young people is that the FTB and IRS, they will never email or call. That's when we know it's a scam. They will receive a letter and they should respond. We encourage them to respond within the time frame that is allotted in the letter. So again, they may need help with that. So now we want to talk a little bit more about how do you prepare a young person for next tax year. So review the JBEA Foster Youth Tax Prep Checklist especially, like I said earlier, make sure they collect every W-2. Help them set up a routine or a plan on saving all their higher education or self-employment expense receipts. It is important with financial aid that our young people get a copy of their financial aid transcripts along with 1098-T. A tax preparer will go through the list of grants and scholarships, determine if the student needs to report all or a portion of the scholarship on the tax return, and they will try to help that young person to maximize the education credit. So spend time going over the educational expenses and how these can help reduce their tax liability. And this is in the Foster Youth Tax Credit Checklist. What are qualified educational expenses? That includes tuition, fees, books, class supplies, and equipment. In addition, if a young person needs a new laptop, if, for schoolwork, if a certain computer software, or they have to have internet because they're attending online classes, and any other related services qualify for the credit if the student needs a computer for attendance at the educational institution. If a foster youth receives a scholarship or grant for a certificate or non-degree program, the entire amount is taxable, whether or not funds are used for qualified education expenses. Unfortunately, room and board are not a qualified expense. And any financial aid that is not spent on a qualified expense will count as additional income. It's not earned, but it does count as additional income. And there's a section where a tax preparer puts that income in there. One thing that I do want to highly recommend for any of our young people who are Uber or Lyft drivers, they should get a separate app to track their mileage. The rideshare companies only track when a client is in the car. They don't track between riders. So we want to make sure our young people track that extra mileage. The only time that the mileage doesn't count is if they're going to their first ride and then they just dropped off their last ride and going home. So we definitely want to make sure our young people are tracking that, because I've worked with some young people that they didn't have that extra mileage counted. So, we were only able to, use what their employer provided them. And also with self-employment for any ride shares, delivery drivers, it's important to note that with self-employment, so when you get a 1099, no taxes are taken out of that. So that's unfortunate because it is, fast, our young people like it, they get all this money, but there's no taxes taken out. So what we highly recommend is for young people to set aside 30% of their income for tax time. So these are important things to note. So when you're working with a young person, help them maybe put money aside, help them go over what what our qualified educational expenses are, help them to, plan that out, how to, keep their receipts, put it all together, maybe put it in a folder, at a young man, put it all in a box. So you want to make sure that they are tracking all of this. Next slide. So we did this in the beginning of the webinar. So now Simone is going to launch a poll to see, where are you feeling now? If you were first maybe a 2 or 3, maybe after the seminar you're bumped up to like 4 or 5. And we hope that the resources JBay has developed will help you feel more confident in supporting foster youth in filing their taxes and claim the foster youth tax credit. So here we have the poll. So we'll give a minute or two.
Right. I'm gonna end the poll, right? Get your last one in. No. Okay, we're looking better. We're looking better. Look at that. Got a
People
lot
are
of
feeling more confident.
That's fantastic. All right, well, let's jump into Q&A. I know we've had so many good questions. I'm like so excited to answer them. if you have more questions, feel free to put them in. We're going to try to get to as many as we can. And if we don't get to your question, feel free to send it our way
Yeah.
later.
And I could start because I wrote some down, some like the ones that are coming in a lot. So
Go for it.
SSI is a need-based federal benefit, so it's not taxable. Um, I addressed hopefully I addressed the NMD conversation with the caregiver. Um, County stipends are not income. So if a young person receives a housing stipend, or let's say they went to an ILP class and they got a stipend for that or cash for that, that is not income, so it is not reported. And we addressed if they missed prior tax
Carla?
year. Yes?
Carla, can we just clarify, put
Okay.
one fine point on that? It shouldn't be considered income, but there are
Yes.
a few instances where, like, we know there's a couple of housing providers that have issued 1099 forms, which is like
Yes.
for self-employment to young people that have received stipends from their program. That should not be happening. So if you are
Yeah.
a housing provider, please do not issue 1099 forms to young people
Yes.
for the allowances you give them. That is absolutely not what is supposed to be happening. But unfortunately, if a young person has received a 1099 from someone for the money they received, you do need to report that, because otherwise, you know, you're gonna be making a mistake on your taxes. Like, it's gonna look like an error and you can't sort of undo it. So I don't know, Carla, if you want to say that in more technical terms, but
Yeah. So if a young person receives the housing stipend and they receive a 1099 for that housing stipend, then yes, that is, we have to report it as a VITA volunteer. And it's very unfortunate for the young person because then that is, that increases their income, so it is taxable. So we really, like Simone said, we really don't want, housing providers to use those. Um, but I know some do. So yes, please change that practice. Um, SILP income is not taxable. So any county benefit like that, like I said, a SILP payment, if they receive, cash for attending workshops, or, a stipend for attending workshops, as long as you don't issue a 1099, then it is not taxable. Um, a couple other things. So we addressed if there's prior years and they missed a foster youth tax credit, you can go back and get that credit for them. So, going through a VITA volunteer would be great. If they did it on, myfreetaxes.org, they self-filed, they can go back, like I said, Google it, and you can pretty much easily, retrieve it, which, that's helped me with TurboTax with some of our young people. Let's see. So those are some of the ones. So we do have the handouts. JBay has, I would highly recommend going to the JBay website and looking at all of the tax preparation, all the tax, resources that we have. Um, hopefully that will answer some of your questions.
I'll
About
ask, there's a lot I've got pasted into a doc here, so I'll just go
okay.
through what we haven't covered. One thing I want to mention is for LA fire victims. Veronica, thank you, Veronica, for bringing this to our attention from the California from the Community College Foundation. She wanted to just reference something about gift tax. So some people have GoFundMe's and other ways of raising some donations to help with people who have lost their homes or that have been displaced, or any other impact from the fire. Just to clarify, if you do receive funds through like a GoFundMe, it's only taxable if it's over $19,000. So if young people have received any GoFundMe funds that are under $19,000, it is not taxable. So that was just one thing. One other thing I think that is a really good question to address is, someone asked, does the youth need to bring any documentation to prove that they were a foster youth to the tax preparer? They do not have to, and they do not have to provide that when they claim the foster youth tax credit, but it's a good practice if they can get it, because what they do with the foster youth tax credit is they give you an option to upload your dependency letter, your verification letter stating you were in foster care. And if you upload that, it serves as backup documentation. The verification process will happen on the back end between the FTB and CSS. But if for some reason that failed, they'd have this backup option in the system. If they don't have that backup option, what will happen is they'll send the young person a letter saying, we couldn't verify you, please send your dependency letter to us. So best practice, get that dependency letter and upload it, but it's totally okay if they don't have it. And no tax preparer should be refusing to claim that credit because they don't have that letter. So if that's happening, I don't know, reach out to us because that is not a requirement to claim the credit. Another question is, will the foster youth tax credit be higher for parenting youth? Do you want to, Carla, talk about how, no, but they would maybe receive other credits?
Yes. So if it's a parenting youth or single, the foster youth tax credit is the same amount for each, filer. But if they have children, there's the different child tax credits that are outlined on the foster youth tax prep checklist. So, there's both state and federal child tax credits they could be potentially eligible for. So, so that's why, earlier in the slide, when Simone was showing the amounts of, what young people received, definitely the parenting youth do get a little bit more money because that's the foster youth tax credit along with other child tax credits.
All right. Someone said, just curious, why did the credit decrease this year? You mentioned last year, single youth received 1,370 and parenting youth 5,265. So I want to clarify, the credit increased. It did not decrease. It went from 1,117 to 1,154. What the other figures are the total tax returns that young people receive. So they probably received, like, the foster youth tax credit was the bulk of their credit or their return. And then they received some other money from some other credit. Could have been the California Earned Income Tax Credit or something else. So their total returns were those larger figures. The foster youth tax credit just being a portion of that. Someone said, my agency is right on the Nevada border. If I have kiddos who are housed over the state line in Nevada but work in California, can they claim the foster youth tax credit? Carly, you want to answer that?
They have to live in California. So their residence has to be in California to claim it.
Or at least the half the tax.
Yes, half the tax. A couple other questions regarding like parenting youth. So, when they go to a tax preparer, that person, there'll be like an intake form and they'll answer like a bunch of questions on that intake form. And they will help that will help the young person decide, how should they file. So head of household is if that young person, if they are the ones that are providing the care and support for the child. So that's a head of household. But there is a questionnaire that the VITA sites have that will help the young person to determine, how they should file. And if it's a parenting youth and they are not with the other parent of that child and they have, shared custody, it is the person that the child primarily lives with and they provide 6 months or more of that care. There can be a conversation between those two of like, well, hey, will it benefit me or benefit you better to, claim that child as a dependent? So those are conversations that should be had. And, then they can make that determination.
One other thing I want to mention is someone had chatted after the discussion about 1099s and housing providers that the auditor's office was their auditor's office was dinged for not reporting stipends to independent living services youth. That's probably because you've classified it the wrong way in your policy. So it can't look like it's not earned income. It can't look like, it has to be classified in the right way. And we can follow up with you to provide that specific information because 1099s are for, like self-employed, like it really should not be reported in that way. And so let's follow up and get you that information so that you can clarify it in your organization's policy. But there was also just a distinction that the reason SILP payments are not taxable is that they're foster care funds. Absolutely. Like that is crystal clear that any foster care funding should not be considered counted as income.
If a young person is going to be claimed on a caregiver's return, the young person should still file their taxes, because the money that they paid into their taxes, on their W-2, the money that's taken out, they can still get some of that money back. So we highly recommend that young people still file, even though, they're not going to be able to get the foster youth tax credit. Again, this is a financial literacy skill. So it's good for them to start doing this now, because it's, at some point, maybe they will not be with that caregiver anymore. And, maybe down the line, they will be able to be eligible for the credit. But it is a good financial literacy skill to get them going and, to learn how to file their taxes.
Someone asked about VITA sub-site events and said, do we need any special computers or software? The VITA volunteers have that software on their computer, right, Carla? So no one needs to, you don't need to worry about that on your end.
Yes.
Carla, can you answer this one? For the cash work, does a filing agency like TurboTax recognize that? Or would youth need to go to an in-person like VITA site to file? What's your recommendation if they have cash?
Well, I've never used TurboTax, so I don't know. I'm sure there is a place where they can put it's counted as other income. So there is some place where they will put it in TurboTax, but they can do it. And I mean, again, a lot of times I will Google things and Google, where do I put other income in TurboTax? And you can probably find it there. myfreetaxes.org, I know exactly where it goes. But again, too, if the young person is not sure, they, should go to a VITA site and they will definitely help them. And one thing, the foster youth tax credit is only for young people in California. So their case had to be here in California, established in California.
Great. I think we have time for like maybe 2 more questions. Carla, what's the best free tax preparer website to use? And is it possible to do it via phone or tablet, or is it just formatted for a computer?
So I say myfreetaxes.org. That's the platform I was trained on. You can do it on a phone. I've done, self-filing events with young people, and they had their phone. For an old person like me, it was hard to navigate it on the phone, but it can be done. So as long as they have any device, a phone, tablet, computer, you can use either TurboTax or myfreetaxes.org.
All right. Last one here. Is financial aid still considered income if it's put into savings?
Yes.
All right. I think, well, it's 11:29. We'll fit one more in. What is the difference between single versus head of household? Can you share that?
That was between single and head of household. So single is it's just you. You're just single, it's just you. Head of household is if you have dependents. So that is if parenting foster youth.
Great. And someone asked if we have youth facing documents. The flyer, the outreach flyer that has eligibility information is definitely youth facing, and our tax prep checklist and our self-filing guide are all youth facing. So those are all resources that you can provide young people. Thank you so much I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions. We can absolutely follow up and answer those if you want to email us your question if it didn't get answered. The person who emailed about the 1099 issue, we will reach out to you. We've got your info, and we'll send all this information out later today with the links and everything. And yay, tax season is almost here. Maybe some of those "I'm dreading it" words we can shift a little bit. Maybe we can change once we see young people getting money back. We'll maybe change our tune on that. But wishing everyone well, especially those down in LA, and hope everyone has a good rest of the week. Bye-bye.
Bye.